Hello, everyone. Thanks for stepping by. As the title says, I'm here to tell you that people who work in React are the lucky ones. But first, let me introduce myself. I'm Szymon Kołodziejczak. I'm a front-end developer with over 5 years of commercial experience. Currently, I'm working in Shiji, where I develop solutions for hospitality business, mostly in React. I had an opportunity to work with various frameworks and libraries, but so far my career was mainly focused on single-page applications. This presentation will be about my transition from Angular to React, as well as the great things I associate with this, and why I'm really a big fan of this tool. So a large part of the presentation will consist of my opinions and impressions. So I want to tell you in advance that you shouldn't take my words as some sort of judgment. Your experience might differ, or you just might have a different opinion. That's cool. I've tried to make this presentation as much as accessible to everyone as I could. So it's not dedicated only to React developers. Although I think React developers shouldn't be bored at all. OK, without further ado, let's take a look at the agenda. In my presentation, I will focus on 4 major things. First, I will start by explaining the difference between a library and a framework. Then I will briefly introduce the simplicity of React. After that, I will take my time to tell you about React's ecosystem. And lastly, we will take a look at the future of React. So let's start with essentials. React is just a library. React is not a framework. You might have heard it before. It's kind of a popular statement, but what does it really mean? A library performs specific, well-defined operations. It's usually just a collection of functions that you can call whenever and wherever you want. So when you use a library, you're in charge of the flow of an application. You're choosing when and where to call a library. In contrast, when you use a framework, the framework is in charge of the flow. It provides some places for you to plug in your code, but the framework itself decides when the code will be used. You can see that the flow is inverted here. Because of that, frameworks are usually more complex than libraries. Any framework can use libraries on its own, but nothing stops the library from using other libraries as well. So the distinction here is really about the control flow. Frameworks calls you, and you call the library. OK, with that being said, we can move on to the next topic, which is React simplicity. Those 3 lines of code here are enough to make a React application today. This React application creates a header that says, hello world. As you can see, to start using React, you don't have to rely on some command line interface to initialize your project. It's just a library. You, as a programmer, get to decide when and where you want to use it. Creating a React app on your own, it's not time-consuming challenge. The code is just simple JavaScript. I've worked on some project written in Backbone.js where we decided to use React in it. And to do so, one part of the view just had very similar code to this slide. And just like that, we started to deliver new features in React. In fact, you can make the code even simple, and instead of using React create element explicit call, you can instead use JSX. JSX stands for JavaScript XML. It's still every bit JavaScript, so you have the power and expressiveness of JS, but with the readability and accessibility of HTML. This header with hello world text is React element, and a function that returns an element is called component. Notice that this is just a function. There is no boilerplate at all. In Angular, though, I had to create class with decorator. Angular documentation to this day says that it's good practice to create a separate file for template and styles. So usually I've tended to create 3 files per component, and then I also needed to register such component in a module. Actually, to be fair, the component registration is something that might be no longer needed soon because the Angular team, as far as I know, is planning to introduce standalone components in the developer preview for Angular 14. This is an example of template inside the TypeScript file. You can notice Angular's built-in tags like ng-template, Angular directives like ngIf and ng-for. These ones are part of the Angular template language, and even though those parts are kind of self-explanatory, there's if condition and for each loop. This is something you have to learn as Angular developer, and your options are limited to the syntax. So you can imagine what a relief was React to me. In Angular, creating a new component seems now like a big undertaking, right? Its API is almost discouraging developers from creating new components. In React, though, the component is very minimalistic. Nothing here is overhead, and it's kind of hard to simplify it at this point. I want to get back to JSX. Let's have a look at the example. This is a very exaggerated one, I'm aware, but it perfectly shows the capabilities of JSX. This component renders simple text. Notice that I can change every part of the output. I can change the tag name. The component renders either paragraph or header based on the name length. I can assign any attribute to the element I want. Look, I'm passing an object here, so I can manipulate its keys and values as I like. It's just JavaScript. There is no need to learn any template language or new syntax. It's a flexible language you already know. In React component, the UI part is not separated from JS code. You can even write styles in JavaScript if you want to. So things that rely on each other, things that are changing together, are naturally located very close. It's a very convenient way to write a code because you don't have to jump around folders and files all the time. And it leads us to another observation. React and its component-based API takes a very simple approach when it comes to separation of concerns. Anything that has to do with rendering the view, whether that be UI, state, and in some cases even styling, is a part of component concern. And all these things in React can be encapsulated into one function. So this simple approach where things are just JavaScript functions, opens the door to the community and its endless ideas. Thanks to the low entry threshold, any JavaScript developer can play with React. So let's talk about ecosystem. Okay. Most of the larger project will eventually face the need of having routing, complex form with validation, HTTP request with shared configuration, and so on. Angular's ecosystem has official support for all these items. So Angular developer can focus on its business logic right away. Project dependency needs are covered out of the box. And how about React? Well, React doesn't cover any item on the list. It helps you build user interface, but that's it. It's so unopinionated that it leaves you with challenge to adapt these things on your own. But it's not the end of the world. These problems are already solved by the community, so you can use third-party library. Because there is no point in reinventing the wheel. For example, routing. You don't want to spend your time on parsing URL on your own. It's time-consuming, and it's an area where you can easily introduce bugs. Just use battle-tested library, which has been constantly improved over the years. So, is React approach better? Not necessarily, because first of all, you have to spend your time on research before picking the right tool for the job. And you can make a wrong choice that might haunt you and your team. From the product manager's perspective, preceding every new project dependency with research might be not the best idea of spending money dedicated to a project. But I believe the time you spend on studying dependencies, it's not something wasted. You get to know others' approach to the same problem. You get to read someone else's code. And that can be really a fresh experience for you to look at the code that is written without limitations and configuration of your project. And even if the knowledge you gained won't be any useful at this time, you might adopt it in the future. Let me give you a quick example of what I mean. So I was looking for a library for internationalization. And although I decided to choose another solution, I still have managed to learn something new from the library named Rosetta. But first, let me explain the code you can see on a slide. So every project that can be found on the NPM registry must have a file called package.json. NPM stands for Node Package Manager, and it's the largest software registry. People use NPM mostly to share software. And this file you see consists of basic information about the project, like its name, description, version. There is also optional section called scripts. These ones help you to automate repetitive tasks, and they can be run by simply typing in your console npm run plus the name of the script, like so. But what I didn't know is that the pretest script will be auto-executed before the test. So I learned about the pre and post scripts from the library whose purpose is totally unrelated to it. And I'm happy to say that I have used this knowledge in all of my projects so far. And the example shows that you can learn not just by reading a source code, but a project configuration as well. By the way, I strongly advise you to check out this guy, Luke Edwards. He's a very talented programmer, and he used to collaborate a lot with Jason Miller, the creator of Preact, another brilliant programmer I follow. Anyway, you can say that this example and this argument can be used for any UI library that essentially does one thing, like React does. Yes, but let's take a look at the State of JS results. State of JS is one of the most popular annual survey in the JavaScript community about the language itself and stuff related to it. And you can see that the most popular libraries are React, Angular, and Vue. And this is something that has been quite stable for years. By the way, this doesn't mean that 80% of websites use React. It means that 80% of people who took part in this survey used React. And whether you like it or not, it means that you most likely will find your job in these technologies. So even if Solid has a very similar API to React, and it's a great library with no doubt, there are small chances that you will work on it in 2022. And that's because it's pretty expensive and complicated for a company to hire and find developers with a rare technology stack. The most popular solution, though, guarantee a deep pool of developers for companies to hire from. Okay, having that said, from these three most popular tools, only React doesn't provide an official ecosystem, official support for the most basic features. I didn't mention Vue earlier, but Vue.js is also a framework. It does provide you router library, state management library, styling solutions. It's all already there just for you. So in a way, in React, the process for of looking for libraries is unnecessary evil. And although this is something that can be found in other solutions as well, you will likely face it with React, as I did. But I think that this necessary evil can be actually a source of satisfaction. Finding a library that is almost tailored to your needs can keep you happy for the rest of the day. Maybe its API will be so satisfying to use that you will love your work even more. And I have an example of that. The library I want to show you is named Recompose. Its description says that this is a React utility built for components. In this example, we have general list component. Its implementation relies on prop name items, but the rest of it is not important here. What is important here is that by using Recompose API, I can easily create new component which is more specific with just one function call. I mean, how cool is that? The code looks very clean to me because the data provider and its consumer are separated. It's easy to test because the list component is just pure function. This library, Recompose, can do much more than that, so I encourage you to check out this library on your own. We will stay with the smiley face just for another slide, because I want to make another point related to satisfaction. If I'm looking for a library that offers solutions for dialogues, I get to choose how my team will write these dialogues. So my input to the project is more meaningful. I'm not only responsible for the code I write, but also for dependencies. The project can become even more personalized, more unique to me, because maybe I haven't worked with that dependency ever before, or because its API is something unusual. You might consider these things as something silly, but having control, having fun at your work is something that can reduce the chance of having job burnout. Okay. Earlier I said that library hunting is a necessary evil in React, and I want to get back to it. In my opinion, React forces you to take a deep dive into its community and their solutions, to spend time studying other people's code. This is something I didn't get used to while I was working in Angular. If a framework gives you all the stuff you need on a silver platter, you probably won't reason about them. I mean, why would you even bother if you have no other options? It's hard to explain the usage of custom library over the official one. The official library is almost guaranteed to have a support for a long time. Angular codebase owners can make adjustments in their code just for the sake of their own library. So they have a big advantage over third-party developers just because of the constraints they made up. By saying constraints, I mean template language, mandatory transpilation, official ecosystem, and overly complex API. These factors limit the community's input. You see, the NPM registry is the most popular software registry. A big chunk of projects out there are open source software. So anyone can see, modify, and distribute the code. For me, this is like a lottery win to have access and the possibility to use these codes in my projects. And I'm happy that React supports it in some way, at least by not making things harder for developers. But don't get me wrong, the Angular ecosystem, it's not something bad. You get to work on stable libraries written by paid developers. Many people appreciate it, and there is nothing wrong with it. React application can be full of bad decisions because it all depends on programmers. They can do whatever they like. Angular, on the other hand, takes care of everything for you, so it reduces the chances of making mistakes. But trying different approaches, making that decisions on your own is something that pushes your experience forward. So you can actually understand the reason behind framework design and see all the pros and cons of it. In React, you can apply any technique you've met in framework, but you don't have to if it doesn't fit your project. It's all about freedom, I guess, and I love the freedom React gives you. This degree of freedom is reflected in the number of React packages available on NPM. The true power of a framework or library comes from the community and the ecosystem around it. The huge ecosystem inspires a creation of vast amount of resources other than just code, like articles, podcasts, videos, presentations. With new resources popping up seemingly all the time, React just plays in different league. Okay, moving to the last part, future. But first, I want to quickly recap the latest trends in the JavaScript community. So the evolution of JavaScript, browsers, and web technologies made it possible to write websites that look exactly and behave exactly like native applications. Single-page application is an approach of taking this possibility to the extreme. But let's explain what a single-page application really is. It's a website with only one HTML file. This single file references JavaScript that basically takes care of everything else. So the real page content is being created by JavaScript on the client side. Single-page application for a certain period of time was considered as a way to go with Angular and React by many people. The hype for SPA was a real thing because JavaScript developers, for the first time, could write entire application in their beloved language and have a full control over the website. And at first sight, single-page application provides a great user experience. Any interaction with the page doesn't require a full page reload. So the website seems to be very interactive. But this is only one side of the coin. The single-page application forces the user to fetch an absurd amount of JavaScript just to see a simple page. Users have to wait for the script before they can see something meaningful and do anything, really. On a slide, you can see the sequence diagram that shows HTTP requests a client has to make to the server to see product page. These all steps are necessary. So first, the browser downloads the index.html file. Then it discovers a script reference in it. So it fetches the script. And after that, JavaScript takes control. It parses the URL and creates content for product page. And only now does browser fetches the data user wanted to see in the first place. During that request, the user will probably see a loader. But the sad thing about this is this loader is kind of necessary to provide any feedback to the user as fast as possible. Otherwise, the user might see a blank page and think that something is broken. Okay, good stuff. The performance issue created by this flow translates into poor CEO because crowd servers, just like users, they need to wait for the script, for the right content, and it simply takes too much time. So the community did its best to minimize the issue. We started to split our code into smaller parts, apply all these fancy techniques, like lazy loading, prefetching, and so on. But the issue here comes from the design of it. We can only minimize the performance problems, but we are doomed to fail from the very beginning when it comes to providing the same performance metrics as traditional websites. The same scenario here, but for traditional website is way shorter. The very first server response can provide the product information. But the single-page application still fits some use cases, like an actual application, or a site where we want to preserve a user interface between navigations. Spotify is a great example of it. We want to listen to the music and at the same time browse albums and playlists of various artists. Another great use case for SPA would be an admin panel where we don't care about CEO and performance metrics, like first time to interactive, first contentful paint, and so on. Okay, so we have hit the rocks when it comes to achieving great performance metrics. The hype for SPA went down, and the old ways of creating websites was again proved to be the right thing to do. But during this period of time where single-page application seemed like a way to go, the community fell in love with component-based approach so much that they've managed to introduce this idea to the servers. The Next.js framework proved you can create a web page on the server with React and at the same time provide a great developer experience. Gatsby.js showed us how easy it is to generate static websites with React. So the servers playing the main role again, but JavaScript developers, they didn't give up full control. They just moved their toys to the server environment. And with the new knowledge and tools, we can get the best of both worlds. We can send the full HTML file with all the content user needs, and then orchestrate the JavaScript framework or library to take control of UI. This way we have a rich interactivity of the SPA with traditional server rendering. This is a trend that has been running for several years now. We have traditional website with progressive enhancements, but instead of outdated libraries like jQuery, we have modern tools like React, Svelte, Vue. And these modern tools made web development way less frustrating than it was before. Next.js framework is getting better and better. Another tool worth following would be Astro.js. It's actually framework agnostic, so you can plug in any UI tool of your choice. But let's stick to React. React components can be stringified to the HTML representation since the very beginning. So technically, React could have been used on the server since 2013. But nowadays, with the appearance of these great tools, this approach is more popular than ever. The latest version of React seems to promote this trend even more. React 18 introduced a feature called server components. It's still in the experimental phase, so its API might be subject to change. But the main idea here is that the component rendered by the server has access to all its resources, like database, file system, and any service. You can say that Next.js is already doing that, but now this is a part of the React API and not some sort of magic thing provided to us by a framework. Now, the server-side logic, along with its UI, can be shared as easily as the client code, because it is a framework agnostic. So all my previous arguments for the use of React can be applied to the server environment as well. Bunch of cool libraries and other resources are yet to come. The server components is much more than that, and I believe it deserves its own presentation. So I won't go into the implementation details now, although you can be sure that React developer won't miss the newest approaches to making websites. But React codebase is written in a way that its API is separated from the actual process of producing the output. You can plug in any render engine and use React syntax. React Native does that. React Native is an example of a project where you can develop your mobile applications. But did you know that React Native applications can work on Apple and Android TV as well? So React developers are not limited to a web platform only, though the web platform itself seems to be everywhere already. But don't you all get too excited, and let's take a look at the state of JS once again, but this time let's see the diagram for satisfaction. Satisfaction in this case means that people would use a tool again. And as you can see, the React is getting lower here. The React was released in 2013, almost 10 years ago. During all these years, its API increased a lot. I suspect that every new feature can divide the community. React's bad decisions are not something that can be erased with its new version. They just can't change the API on which thousands of projects depend. And new tools, ideas are on the horizon. New tools that can learn the lessons from the React and apply them in their own code base. But React hasn't said its last word yet. And based on everything I'm seeing, it shows no signs of slowing down. Okay, one last thing before I outstay my welcome here. Because of my presentation, you might think that web development is all about React these days. But it's not true. Even though React generally dominates all these JavaScript frameworks, for some pages, JavaScript is not necessary at all. Most websites are created by people who don't want to get involved in programming, and content management systems written in other technologies are way more used, like WordPress. But I guess that changes nothing in terms of my presentation, doesn't it? All right, this is all I prepared for today. Thank you for your time and for having me here. It was a pleasure, and I hope I've managed to convince some of you that React developers are truly the lucky ones. Okay, I shared my point of view. How about yours? What do you think about it? Yeah, my presentation is supposed to be longer, but I guess I read all these slides too fast. Sorry about that. Okay, any questions? We still have a couple of minutes. Okay, then. Thanks once again.